Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session entitled Putting People First, Citizen-centric Climate Adaptation and Mitigation in Water. My name's Clarissa Brocklehurst. I'm with the Water Institute at the University of North Carolina, and I'm delighted to be moderating today. We have a great session for you. In the space of a short hour, we're going to hear from three people who are working at the front lines with citizens groups passionate about the protection of water resources. We'll then invite two other people to join them, one from the government of Uganda and one a youth activist in Canada for a panel discussion. I'll introduce everyone as we go along. We hope to have some time for questions from the audience, so please be ready to type questions into the Pathable chat box. And just so that everybody's clear, we don't mean the Zoom chat box. You have to put your questions into the Pathable chat box. One way to do this is to split your screen so you can see both Zoom and Pathable at the same time. And I'll just point out to everybody that on the Pathable site, you have to scroll way down to the bottom before you find the chat box. But once you do, you can put in questions there. We're going to have somebody monitoring that chat box throughout, and they will relay questions to me, and we'll ask the panelists to answer them if we have time at the end of the panel discussion. And then finally, we're going to ask the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to water and sanitation to wrap up for us and give some closing reflections. So a great session. So first, I'm going to turn to Sarah Keena to open for us. She leads the social inclusion agenda in the World Bank Water Global Practice. And she's worked for 25 years with the World Bank Group, leading efforts to increase citizen engagement and social inclusion, and has helped shape the World Bank's corporate requirements on citizen engagement. Sarah, I'm going to turn over to you.
Thank you very much, Clarissa, and good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're connecting from. I'm really excited about this session, in part because one of the things we know is that the scale of climate change is both larger and accelerating faster than anybody has anticipated, with 40 to 50% and growing of the world under water stress, and with 1 billion more people in monsoonal basins, just as an example. So the types of actions that are needed to adequately respond in a way that does not exacerbate inequality requires change at many different levels. It requires changes in behavior, for example, switching to crops that use less water, such as lentils instead of rice. It requires changes in policies that will allow not only for more sustainable management of water, but for more equitable management of water resources. It requires changes in land use practices, leaving some land fallow, and investments to adapt to increases in flooding, and it requires changes in investments and sometimes associated pricing, from more fecal sludge management to preserve the quality of scarce water resources to physical investments in flood prevention and control, all of which require substantial public support. So while some of these actions are within the scope government control, governments can and do tend sometimes to get stuck or be driven by political incentives that may or may not align with long-term sustainability, and often have challenges operating across political boundaries. Just as one example, there's 276 transboundary basins shared by 148 countries. So it gives you a sense of the challenges that we face in managing a shared resource. Civil society organizations can and often do engage communities in participatory resilience planning or in initiatives to better manage floods and droughts. But because water flows across boundaries, they may not have the scale needed to fully address the problem. In addition, the type of information and understanding of how watersheds work and on how one's own actions or those of actors upstream or downstream affect one's own water situation, it's often lacking at the local level. How many citizens know where their watershed is and where their watershed comes from, and what different actions upstream or downstream or in the watershed affect their own quality and quantity of water? So we often talk about whole of society approaches needed to affect change or adapt at the level required. Today, through the examples that we're going to hear and through the debate we will have with your participation, we will explore three distinct components of whole of society approaches. First, civil society and citizen action that can and should be taken regardless of what government is doing, and how to fully inform and empower citizens to shift behavior. as we'll hear in the case of India, and also as we'll hear from the case of reciprocal water agreements in Colombia, where citizens were able to cross boundaries and come up with solutions. Second, citizen to government action. Governments can get stuck. Citizens can and have successfully advocated for sustainable water management and water quality, as we'll hear in the case of Mali. And third, government to citizen action. Governments have the advantage of being able to operate at scale, but how can and do they engage citizens as more active participants in river basin management and watershed management? How well are their actions actually perceived by groups that may have less visible control over water rights? We'll hear both the government perspective from the water commissioner in Uganda and also the perspective from an indigenous youth activist.
Oh, I think Sarah's connection may have frozen. I'm going to assume that she was getting towards the end of her opening, and thanks very much to her for that. What I'm going to do now is turn to a lightning round of short presentations by people who are going to join us from Fundación Natura, IRC, and WaterAid. Before that, I just want to say thanks to the co-conveners who helped come together, put this session together. You can see their logos at the bottom of the slide here: WaterAid, the Swedish International Development Agency, IUCN, the Government of the Netherlands, and the World Bank Group. So many thanks to them. So for the first presentation, I'm going to turn to Maria Teresa Vargas, who works for Fundación Natura, an NGO in Bolivia. She has a master's degree in economic policy from a university in Costa Rica and another master's in forestry from Yale University. Maria Teresa works with mayors and councillors from 60 municipalities across Bolivia to help them protect their forested water sources. We're going to hear from her about citizen-to-citizen engagement in Bolivia. So, Maria Teresa, over to you.
Hello to everyone. Do you hear me?
We hear you just fine, thanks.
Okay. So thanks everyone for organizing this site event. For me, it's an honor to be here, and I know it had been a lot of work behind the scenes. So thank you for doing that. Today, I want to talk to you about Watershed. It's a program that we have been designed and implemented in the last 18 years across the Andes. As you may know, 80% of the deforestation in the Amazon, it is explained because the expansion of the cattle grazing. But the cattle doesn't just take the water, it take the forest, it also pollute the water. 75% of each source of water in the Amazon has presence of fecal coliform. And more important, around 40 million people in the local village, in those towns, depend on this water source in order to have water access in their own households. But if we preserve 1 hectare of this forest that is taken away in other places for cattle, actually that hectare of forest provide water enough for 1 family for a year. Next, please. Can we go next to the next slide? So what we have done is create a local solution. If you go one behind, please. A local solution that is led by the local municipality, the local enterprise, the Water Irrigation Association, and us. It provides the local funds and the resources, but the governance too, and provide development projects to people upstream to do 2 things: to change practice and to protect the intact forest that is there, in order to have a healthy watershed that provides resources for the people who are protecting the forest upstream, but also for the people down the stream. This is a local solution organized and led by the local municipalities. Can we go next to the next slide? This model is designed and implemented and financed by the local communities. It does conservation, it helps with development, it helps with the protection of the watershed, it helps with the climate change and adaptation, but more important than all, is helped to empower rural community especially the water enterprise, the local water committed, who are providing water for many, many citizens, but they didn't receive any attention for international cooperation or even their own governments. This model starts with minimum start cost and then quickly self-finance. Also use social norms to change behavior more than payment for environmental services. Of course, the conservation have to provide better livelihood for people who are doing this job. And because it's a simple tool, it actually helps to be replicable in many other municipalities. This model has been started in Bolivia, but has gone to many other different places in the tropical Andes, but also went to Africa, in Kenya, Madagascar, and South Africa, and also Nepal and India. In Bolivia, we're implemented in 60 municipalities, but more important, 14,000 farmers are changing behavior and changing practice and protective forests for their own good, but also for the people down the stream. These people, these 14,000 farmers are protecting almost 1 million acres across Bolivia. And the most important of all is that almost 400,000 water users are contributing to this conservation through the water bill every month. Can we go to the next slide? They asked me to talk a little bit about the challenges that we face. And we face many challenges to go and expand and scale up this model. But I will talk about 3 of them that I consider are the most important. Even though this model is bottom-up based, led by the local municipalities, and it had been going quickly from one municipality to another, not just in Bolivia, outside Bolivia too, it didn't get the traction of the national government yet. So that, at least in Bolivia. The second thing that we have is every people who go and evaluate our program, they compare with the PS, and this is not a PS scheme. We do not base this in neoclassical economic theory. We do not do calculation in supply and demand on opportunity cost. This is a local solution. It's an in-kind incentives base. It's a local ownership, self-finance, and really is based in behavioral economic. And the third thing is watershed has proved at this moment that work across country, across culture, across biomas, but a few NGOs, a few institutions has taken the model and replicated it itself. So we are not good copying what other good institutions are doing. And I think that is one of the big challenges that we have.
Thank you very much, Maria Teresa. Thank you. That's a very inspiring presentation. I'm now going to turn to Afu Bengali, who's the country coordinator for the non-government organization IRC in Mali. Afu has a doctoral degree in pharmacy, which is an interesting way to start a career in the water sector. She's been working in development cooperation for 10 years, of which the last 6 have been in the water and sanitation sector. And she's going to speak to us about the citizen to government engagement she's been supporting in Mali. Afu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Clarissa. And I would like to take this opportunity also. Thank you all who have organized this event. And thank you for those who have joined us to listen about the case study sharing that we are going to have. Is going to be a very learning experience. And I guess and hope that everybody will take something back home and in terms of scaling up. So next slide. Today, I will go to speak about a 5 years program. So that was called Watershed Programs. That was funded by the Foreign Minister Affairs of Netherlands. And this program was 5 years programs, and it was developed precisely for Mali to address the root causes of water insecurity and linked to accountability of the water sector in order to focus more on waste management and water quality issues in the country. So issues related or challenges related on water resource management in the country that we found in these programs and we've been trying to address was some of those challenges here. In the district of Bamako, which is the capital city, which was one of the intervention area of these programs. One of the challenge we've been facing that was really a very big one, polluting the water quality in the main Niger River, which is the river that crosses the whole country in Mali, is that fecal sludge disposal. Nowadays, this is really something, a very big challenge regarding water resource pollution in the country. As you can see in this picture, in the yellow circle, that's the place where fecal sludge are being disposed openly into the nature, which has an impact on ecosystem, which has an impact on the population living around. And this goes straight to the Niger River. So that means that and you can see in this picture and the map that the distance between the fecal sludge disposal and the river are very close, it's not far. So that has something we have been trying to address on this program. Next slide. So what we did precisely, this was really an advocacy and action-based work we did. What we did is to address this fecal sludge challenge in the country. We capacity build a civil society organization with whom we work in this program. There were 3 civil society organizations with whom we have been working, and the local government as well. We work with those one. Then one of the things for the fecal sludge was really able to lobby with the parliamentarians and take them to the field. And that was one of the greatest actions that we've taken. As you can see in those images, those are parliamentarians, so we've taken to the field where the fecal sludge are being dumped openly in the city of Bamako, which is the capital city of Mali. And we did not stop over there. We brought with us the national TV to cover the event. And we brought with us also the network of journalists with whom we've been working in these programs. So this event was really very much diffused and disseminated on the local media, and it has making really a huge impact. And later on, next slide, later on, when we've done this visit, one of the straight outcomes that came, immediately outcome that came, is that those parliamentarians we took to the field called the 2 ministers in charge of water and sanitation in the National Assembly for hearings. What is going on? And later, after this calling, these parliamentarians we took also lobby for to have 4 billion of safer, the national currency, to be able now to make sure that we have this space where the fecal sludge are being dumped, to have that one fence and to be secure, so that this will not find themselves in the water resource, the Niger River. And one of the greatest achievements I would like also to highlight on this presentation is that we are with the civil society organization nowadays, is this credibility to approach with the decision makers. And this picture shows that civil society organization meeting the Minister of Sanitation. And after this meeting, one great outcomes come in this program. The government of Mali has issued a decree to stop dredging for 1 year over the Niger River. And through this program, we've now set up different citizen watch committees to monitor the implementation of this decree set by the government in the country. So next slide. So some of the key challenges we've been facing during this and still is that the country, the stability, political stability, because this was really an action-oriented advocacy work we've been doing. And by doing that one, we needed the decision makers. So the political instability has really be a big challenge in our approach and our work in this case study. Then another thing was also the understanding of the linkages between WASH and IWRM, because when we started this program, there was these partners working in silos. WASH workers are working alone and IWRM are working alone as well. So we thought in this program to create a dialogue to make sure that there is a joint coordination, there is a joint planning, and there is a better understanding by all actors, because you can't have any sustainable WASH services without addressing properly IWRM in your approach. So we wanted to pull this out. Until today, we still needed to keep furthering this approach for understanding with all different actors. And the last challenge.
Okay, Afu, I'm going to ask you to wrap up. So glad you're on the last challenge.
the last challenge was really the access to data, because we're talking about advocacy and lobbying approach. So you can't do that without having really proper data. So one of the challenges we've been facing is to access those data. And this is really something that has been challenging because of the institutional framework of the WASH sector in the country. We could not really access on this one, but we managed through lobbying and advocacy. We managed now to put in place an online portal where you have information data related on water quality through this program.
Okay.
And nowadays, this is being done by the government of Mali. Thank you.
Great, Afu, what a great story. And thanks. Very interesting with the use of the local media as well. So for the final presentation, I'm going to call on Puneet Srivastava, who's a water sector expert based in Lucknow, India, who works with WaterAid. And he's going to tell us about his work with the democratization of water using the concept of Jal Jupal, which is an example of government to citizen engagement. So Puneet, welcome.
Thank you, Clarissa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting to this very interesting session. I'm going to present today the experience of democratizing water governance in India through water democratic platforms, which are called in local language here in Hindi, Jal Chopal. And this water democratic platform has worked at different levels, as you can see in the slide, in the pictures, from village level to agglomeration of village, that is Gram Panchayat, state, national level, and so on. Next slide, please. So what have been the challenge that we have faced is that the climate change and water security linkages are largely unclear to the people and also to the project or program implementing agencies, including the governments. Water is dispersed in public governance across many uses. So like irrigation, industries, water supply, flood management, watershed, river works, etc., etc. And therefore, they often work in silos. So the convergent action and planning on the overall water security sometimes is missing because of the lack of convergence among all these uses of water. And then finally, we didn't have any common democratic platform for all water governance related issues, discussions, knowledge sharing, and where people can talk about convergent action by themselves, and also the synchronizing with the government programs based on the common understanding of these challenges in terms of solution of some of the water security problems. So the result is what you could see in the pictures there. So what were the actions taken by us was that we developed different kind of tools for doing these discussions with the community, with the government stakeholders, with the local other stakeholders on the principles of the democracy. And these tools like participatory vulnerability assessment tool for mapping out the risk to climate change, etc., water budgeting, gender and water, etc., were used. And we conceptualized the platform of Jal Jopal, which was based on decentralized governance model in a democratic setup that we have, like in India. And if we talk about government to citizen engagement, we saw the use of this tool at a district level in what is called district of Banda in terms of capacity development. And then we supported other agencies, including NGOs, government departments, etc., in scaling up this model in other programs run by other agencies. And finally, we disseminated the learnings at various national and international platforms of these. And you can see that these discussions have spontaneously generated a lot of triggering action by the communities in terms of ensuring their local water security. Next slide, please. So the key achievements on use of Jal Chowpal, or this democratization of water, was that there has been observed enhanced knowledge and convergent action on integrated water resources management. You can see a district magistrate in the right picture in Bandar holding a Jal Chowpal at a district level in terms of discussions on the water security and ensuring the follow-up actions. Based on that, we have a democratic space for climate change and water embedded in the current democratic governance model at all levels. Like in rural India, we have a Panchayati Raj system, which is a system of local government. And this whole model is embedded within that governance model to ensure that it works in mainstream, linking up with the ongoing government initiatives and programs to the citizens. And finally, we observed the bigger impacts of government programs on water by enhanced community participation and community action. So all this and this has resulted into big success, and in a very small time in a campaignship, you could see that this initiative has been winner of many awards at the national level. You can see it implemented by government agencies gradually, like Central Groundwater Board, and the maximum the effort has been registered in the Limca Book of Records as the Indian record for maximum number of contour trenches dug by the communities for recharging of the groundwater and holding maximum number of Jal Chowpals in a district in a couple of months. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, so overall, yeah, I think we have one more slide here. So the challenges we faced was that lack of understanding of Jal Chowpal model for triggering community action among wider stakeholders in the northern states of India. We wanted this to be integrated in a mainstream government program in India, like Jal Jeevan Mission or Jal Shakti Abhiyan, which are pan-India flagship programs of the federal government. So we have been pushing for that in terms of engagement with the people, and scaling up at district-wide and as district-wide and district-led approach in other states has been a challenge so far, but we are building up by supporting and preparing a cadre of resource persons who could actually take it forward in terms of its replication from the civil society sector. So that is, I think, the main challenges that we faced on this experience. Thank you so much, Clarissa.
Thank you so much, Puneet. Thank you. Very interesting. And thanks to all of our presenters. I know how hard it is to talk about your work in such a scant 5-minute presentation, but you all did a great job. I'm now going to ask Kalis Tindimugaya from Uganda to join the panelists, and also Autumn Peltier. Now, I understand we're having a bit of trouble getting Autumn connected, so she may be coming in by phone. We may not have video for Autumn.
Clarissa, I see that Autumn is connected. Hi, Autumn. Can you unmute, please?
But we don't have video, right? Just audio.
That is correct.
Autumn, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi.
Okay, great. So thanks very much to both Kalis and Autumn for joining us. What I'm going to do now is we're going to have a panel discussion with our 3 presenters and Kalis and Autumn. And first, I'm going to turn to Kalis Tindimugaya, who is a water resources specialist and has worked with the Ugandan Ministry of Water and Environment for over 30 years. He's currently head of the Department for Water Resource Planning and Regulation, with overall responsibility for ensuring sustainable and equitable utilization and protection of water resources. And Kalis, I understand you've been key in promoting stakeholder-driven planning, development, and management of water and related resources in Uganda. So welcome very much to our session. Caliste, I know that you've had experience with engaging with civil society organizations in Uganda, and I'd like to get your reactions on what you've heard from our three presenters. And what has your experience been in how government officials like yourself can engage with citizens or citizens organizations to address water issues, especially those related to climate change? So I'd be very interested in your perspective.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be part of this panel. Yes, I have actually listened to very interesting case studies from the three countries. And what comes out clearly is that very good work is done by the citizens, by the civil society, but oftentimes governments don't recognize it. And I think what has come out clearly is that, for example, you find that where services are needed, government doesn't respond. Where data is needed, that government doesn't respond. So I clearly see that we need to get government to respond very positively. Governments have a duty to look after the citizens, and the citizens also have a role and responsibility to play. So I think what I can say is very interesting work, but we need to bridge the gap between the government and the citizens. Now, for Uganda in particular, we have also recognized that when we are dealing with issues of water and environment, we need to bring everybody on board, because water doesn't actually affect the government. It affects the people, it affects the civil society, it affects the private sector, the cultural institutions, everybody. So government needs to give space to everybody so that we can contribute. And of course, when it comes to issues of climate change, floods, droughts, landslides, they affect everybody, but the citizens are the ones who are affected most. So for Uganda, we have recognized that we need to create space where we create platforms where stakeholders engage. But we're also recognizing that water doesn't follow administrative boundaries. So we follow a catchment. And again, as has been highlighted, catchment model becomes very important. So we bring all the stakeholders, the CSOs, the cultural institutions, religious institutions, private sector, academia, and government agencies to work together. And through that arrangement, we leverage capacities, we leverage resources, but also hold each other accountable. And through that arrangement, we have actually been able to move. Where we had some issues and challenges, we face them together. If a civil society is good at engagement, government takes responsibility for doing some technical work. We have the media who help us to raise awareness among the people. So through that arrangement, we have actually been able to work together to prepare catchment management plans and create catchment management organizations where everybody is involved, and we are growing the actions, and we are who is going to do what, and the resources are actually all are put together. Each organization remains with their resources, but we are grown how we are going to work together on nature-based solutions, actions to address climate change. And through that arrangement, we have been able to create good mechanisms for all of us to work together, considering that we come with different capacities and experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caliste. Very interesting. And I'm going to come back to you a bit later in the panel to ask you a bit more about this issue of building capacity. First, I'm going to turn to Autumn Peltier for her reaction, bearing in mind that she's connected by phone and perhaps hasn't been able to hear all of our presenters. But let me just explain who Autumn is. She's a young Canadian water activist who advocates for clean drinking water in First Nations communities in Canada and for Indigenous people around the world. She comes from Wikwenekong First Nation on Manitoulin Island in Northern Ontario and is from Ojibwe and Odawa heritage. So Autumn, you've been an activist since you were 12. Are the experiences you've heard about during this seminar, this session, are they similar to those you've had as a water activist in Canada? And what are the key challenges in establishing a successful relationship between communities or civil society organizations and government, and empowering communities and enabling self-determination? And what kinds of lessons do you have for marginalized communities or constituencies which may feel powerless? Are you able to hear us, Autumn? Are you there? Great, we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, Like you said, I've been doing this for a very long time now. I'm now 16, turning 17 next month. But from what I've seen and working with different countries and hearing different stories, is that it's all the same issue. And in my opinion, I feel like all I have to say is that we shouldn't even have to worry about this, as water, like clean drinking water, is a basic human right and should be a basic human right. But you see places like here in Canada, First Nations communities, like we're looked at as like a first world country, but there's First Nations communities and First Nations people that are living in third world conditions. And it's, like I said, this shouldn't even have to be an issue. Water, in my opinion, water shouldn't even have to be for sale, because I'll say it again, water should be a basic human right. And it's sad to hear that it's really sad to hear some of the stories that I've heard about different countries and different communities. And everybody deserves access to clean drinking water, no matter what our race is, no matter what our skin color is, or no matter how rich or poor we are. And I feel like that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. And I know that Autumn, you're quite inspiring. Full disclosure, I'm Canadian, so I know who you are, and I know the effect you've had. One of the parts of my question to you was, how do you think that we can empower communities? And I don't just mean First Nations and Indigenous communities in Canada, but some of the communities that we've heard the others on this session talk about. What do you think is one way that you have found useful in your work to empower communities to have a voice?
In my work, I find that like empowering the youth is most important, and that's what I like advocate for and encourage the most, is empowering youth and encouraging youth to use their voices, because in my opinion, the message is so much more stronger when it comes from a young person, because you wouldn't generally think that a young person would be speaking up on these types of issues, which we shouldn't be. Because I like to say that's when you know something is wrong, is when a young person, is when a youth has to go and speak up. That's when you know something is wrong and something has to be done. And so I strongly encourage is like empowering youth to use their voices and just raising awareness and just empowering young people.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that, and for that very particular perspective that you bring to us. So now I'm going to turn to Afu, Puneet, and Maria Teresa on our panel. And we've heard a bit about the tools that you've used to ensure that all citizens, including the most marginalized, have an effective voice. But I'd like to ask you now about scaling up. What others can learn from your experience and how we could scale up. So I'm going to turn first to Puneet. We're going to go in reverse order than we did before. You mentioned some of the challenges of going to scale in the large and complex country of India. There are a few larger or more complex. So in just a couple of short sentences, can you tell me how you're working to overcome those challenges and go to scale within India? Puneet, I think you're on mute, Puneet. Thanks.
Thank you, Clarissa. So what we are trying to do to overcome the challenges that we have faced in terms of scaling up of this model to other districts and also other states as well. We are trying to build up a cadre of trained resource persons or people who can actually facilitate this process. And as the earlier speaker told about, the engagement of the young people is quite critical in that way. So we have a young cadre team from the grassroots organizations, which we see as a way forward in training them and taking it up in supporting the process of Jal Chowpal in different districts, along with all the stakeholders bringing on the neutral platform of Jal Chowpal as a democratic platform. And the second is to ensure the voices of the marginalized and the poor are accounted for in this whole process of decision making at the local level. We have ensured that there has to be a quorum of these groups for these Jal Chowpals to be conducted at various levels so that we knew that the voices of the marginalized and the women have come in front when it comes to decision making on water and climate change. And the third thing is that we are trying to influence this whole the model to be replicated in the flagship central government program so that it can reach out pan-India in the days to come. So that is how we see it. Thank you.
Thanks, Puneet. And Afu, can I turn to you and ask you what you think is required for other organizations to replicate what you've done and what governments need to do? You mentioned the challenges of data and the continuity within government. How do you think that those can be overcome in order to go to scale?
Okay, unmuting myself. Okay, first for the organizations, those will need to scale up what we've done. The first things from my opinions is that if you are in an advocacy process, the basic things to do is first understanding public policies. Not only understanding, but also how to develop public policies. What are the process of developing public policies? And that's all the steps that we've done in this program so fast for the civil society organization to understand and to be able to analyze public policies and to monitor them, how they are being implemented on the ground. That's the first thing those organizations will need first to do. And the second one, I will say, those organizations that we wish to scale up what we did is also this open dialogue with government. Because sometimes you find that civil society organizations have this tendency of looking at the government as a kind of a strange partner which you cannot work closely. And I say, no, this is something we need to break up and to look at the government as a close development partners, because so they are the one in charge of those policies that citizen or civil society organization will be monitoring. For the governments, I will say that for the governments, they will need to be looking at civil society organization and citizen as partners. And I mean by that partners is really get them involved in all the process. When I need all the process from down to up, so citizens should get involved in this process, because the experience has shown in our case in Mali that nowadays we have even the network of journalism for water and sanitation are being invited by the government, because they have seen that this is not only journalists, but they have also a key role to play in all this process of developing the sector in the country.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to go to Maria Teresa. We'll come back maybe if we have time to you. And Maria Teresa, you've already implemented the reciprocal agreement process in 15 countries, but you mentioned that your model is infinitely replicable, which I love to hear. It's very inspiring. But what are the conditions or actions needed to go to infinite scale? What are the risks? And please don't hesitate to relate back to what Puneet and Afu have said. We'd be interested to hear where there are parallels.
Thank you, Clarice, for the question, and I am delighted to hear the other panelists too. I think all of us would like to have the silver bullet and one recipe that can apply and implement everywhere. And we know that that's not true, and it will be difficult to find that silver bullet. Anyway, I think we have 4 paths in our assessment to go to upscale. One is that government take what we do and implement it across the country. The second thing is that maybe the private sector see that they can actually make some money and they can implement whatever tool we have developed. The third way is like other NGOs copy, other entities copy what you're doing and they implement in different places. And I think the fourth path is you as yourself, your entity actually implement it everywhere. I think, and then it's every mix between those 4 that I just explained to you. We took a path actually, and it's a mixed path. It's not just one path. And watershed is more than anything else, is a philosophy for us. So people who produce the water share it, people who benefit from the water share the benefit. That's the main philosophy. So what happened in our case is people buy into this philosophy and has been implemented reciprocal watershed agreement, not just in Bolivia, in different places. No? So Natura doesn't need to be physically implementing many of these places, the reciprocal watershed agreement, but moreover need to inspire, train other local leaders, other local officials, and other NGOs to actually take our model and implement it, adapt it to their own reality and implement it in those places. So what we have done is create what we call the Reciprocal Watershed School. It's a 5-day program. So we bring and gather in there local leaders, officials, and NGOs, and we teach them how this is run from day 1 to day 5, actually, and teach them how has worked this and across different settings, no? Across the Andean with the cloud forest, with the coffee producer, how with the rich milk producer about Bogota has implemented the program, but how also indigenous people in the lowland Chaco has used the reciprocal watershed agreement in order to provide water for themselves, but also for people down the stream, and so on in the cenotes in Mexico and Yucatan too. So all the participants in this school get to know what works and what doesn't work, actually, and how they can adapt the model and implement it in their own setting. So that means we don't need to be physical there, but they can actually learn the concept and implement it by their own. This is one of the ways that we are taking to go to scale, and that has led us to go to different places, Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru.
So you're able to leverage yourselves. So thank you very much to the three of you. And I'm now going to turn back to Caliste for a government perspective. And, you know, Caliste, when you were speaking earlier, you talked a bit about the challenges that you'd faced. And one of the questions I wanted to come back and ask you is about building capacity in government. I think we've heard from our other panelists about how they've built capacity within civil society organizations, but I'd really like to hear from you about what you think needs to be done to build capacity within government to fully engage with citizens and work jointly with them. And how do we shift the culture within government agencies? Do we still have Caliste?
I believe he disconnected.
Oh, no. Oh, that's dreadful. All right, sorry about that. And that was a really interesting thing I wanted to hear about. Perhaps what I can do is turn to the panelists and say, in your experience, what has been the most effective thing that you've seen happen to build capacity within governments? I mean, in many cases, governments have been notoriously difficult to work with, but you have obviously had success. So do either of the three of you want to talk about what you have found most effective when dealing with building government capacity to understand the issues? And I'll open that up to Autumn as well if she wants to weigh in on that. Does anybody want to come in? Maria Teresa?
Yeah, thank you for the question. You know, we work with many officials actually at the local level. We haven't been getting traction at the national level, at least in Bolivia. Ecuador actually has taken our model and implemented it across Ecuador, but it didn't happen in the country. But I think that have to be more with the ideological thinking about what we do more than the reality. But at the local level, I think if you empower the local government and you give it the tools to them, they can adapt it and implement it. What happened is we as an NGOs or we as a lab, we has developed something really unique and amazing, and we want that they implement it in the same way. And I think that's not happening. You have to know that some of the beauty or whatever you build as an NGO, it will be gone because they will adapt to their own reality and the budget of the local government. But in our case, we really try that they keep the cost low. This low risk is bottom up. So I will say the basic of the model, we hope they keep having that and they don't lose that. But other things, they will change. So we have to be willing to lose something in order for the governments to adapt the model. And I think that link is really important.
Okay, thanks very much. That's very, very, very interesting. And we did have an audience question on on CSO capacity and the preparatory work that is necessary to make this work. But I feel that the panelists have actually talked a lot about the kind of prep work, the kind of extensive prep work that needs to be done to be able to make these kinds of movements possible. Afu or Puneet or Autumn, do you want to come in on this issue of capacity, either within CSOs or within government? If not, I'm going to turn to Autumn for another question.
Yeah, I can.
Thanks, Clarissa.
Yeah, okay, Puneet first and then Afu after him, very, very quickly.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we try to do is to first build the capacity within the CSO partners in terms of the operationalization model of Jal Chowpal, how does it work, and how to facilitate that process with the different tiers of the government. And then when the demand from the government came up for application of this model at the entire district level, what we did that we provided the capacity building to the different tiers of the government, but at the same time realizing that our role is just that of facilitator, and it is the district administration that is leading the entire work in the district and training them in the process in terms of using the Jal Chowpal for triggering people for a community action and linking up with their ongoing government programs on water conservation and protection.
Okay,
so
thanks.
that is how we try to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Afu, very quickly, one sentence, because we're winding down.
Okay, so regarding the civil society organization capacity building and the government, for us, what we did that was very practical. The first things we did in this program is first connect context analysis and to know what are the gaps in terms of capacity building those civil society organizations they needed. And that's where now we make a plan of capacity building action plan, and we implemented that one. But during the implementation, we found that because this was a lobbying and advocacy process, we found that this local government with whom we are going to work or to influence, they have no idea about some of the topics or some of the issues we are addressing. So that's where now we brought the component of the local government capacity building in the programs. And we did now 2 capacity building at the same time to have the same understanding. And that's where you can now face the same challenge together.
Okay.
That's what we do.
Thanks very much. So we have Caliste back. Caliste, we're just winding down to the end, and I want to ask Autumn a final question before we turn over to Pedro. But do you just have a sentence or two to say about what kinds of capacity building you think is needed within government to change government ability to work with civil society organizations and also to shift the culture within government? Oh, you're muted, Caliste.
Yes, sorry again for getting off.
It's okay.
Yes, I think one of the things that needs to be done in government is to expose governments what the various stakeholders are doing. Oftentimes, as I think Afo has mentioned, you find that the civil society work independent of government. They don't even understand government policy. They don't even have the courtesy to inform government of what they are doing. So exposing government what the civil society are doing is one way of getting them to be part of the process. Also having joint programs. I think we can have joint programs with the government, also creating those platforms. Study visits and tours are some of the things we need to get, but also get the civil society to demand that the government should provide the services, and getting the media to expose the shortfalls which government is not doing. But the government also needs to recognize that it doesn't have the capacity to do everything by itself. It needs to work with the others so that we can deliver services, despite the fact that it is the duty bearer.
Thanks, Caliste. Very helpful, very insightful. So I have one last quick question for Autumn, if she's still on the line. And I want to ask if, from her perspective, as a young person, only 16, turning 17, are you optimistic, Autumn, about the water awareness among citizens? Citizen water literacy is being raised. Do you feel that that things are getting better in terms of citizen engagement?
I think my answer to this is that a lot more relationship building between citizens and government has to be built. Because, for example, if you look at First Nations people and government, you'll see a lot of people talk about broken promises, and it's that where you need to rebuild trust and you need to build a relationship. And I think that's probably a very important part of that. And yeah, I think all I really have to say is that relationship building and creating like relationships and creating trust is a very big part and a very big very big part of it.
Excellent. Very, very well put. Very well put. On that inspiring note, I'm very honored to be able to turn to Pedro Aroha Agudo to close up our session today. Pedro is the UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation. He was appointed by the UN Human Rights Council in 2020, started his mandate in November of that year. In the past, he served as an elected member of the Spanish Parliament, and he's a professor at the University of Zaragoza. And Pedro, you see this issue through a human rights lens. And what does the human right perspective tell us about citizen engagement and the rights of citizens to engage in decisions further upstream? And I'd also hoping that you'd speak a bit to the target under SDG 6 that relates to participation of local communities. But do you think we can go beyond participation? So over to you to say a few closing remarks before we finish up the session.
So first of all, thank you indeed very much. In my view, there are two keys to tackling the global water crisis. On the one hand, making peace with our rivers, aquifers, and wetlands, and on the other hand, developing models of democratic governance in the management of water and sanitation services, and in the management of aquatic ecosystems. Both keys, sustainability and participatory democracy, are part of what is meant by a human right-based approach to water and sanitation governance. In my view, human rights should not be seen as a simple development of solidarity with the most impoverished, but represent the core of the democratic global governance that the world increasingly needs. From this human right-based approach, the effective realization of the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation requires transparency and public participation, which in the case of small rural communities translates into transparency, into community participation in particular, indigenous people and many peasant communities have kept alive traditions of community management of common goods, especially water. Understanding water as a common good and not as a commodity requires community participation and ownership. In complex societies, of course, and in management of large ecosystems such as river basin, this conception of water as a common good and this community approach to management must preside over what will inevitably require state action and responsibility. Therefore, in these cases, democratic water governance from the public responsibility of the state must respect and develop the principles of participation and collective responsibility that govern the community approach to management and the consideration of water as a common good. Regarding the specific question about how civil society organizations and activists can help us fulfill the human right to water, we have to be clear about what the roots of this global water crisis are. And on this, in fact, on this blue planet, paradoxical, that could be called the water planet, isn't it? A crisis presided over by those 2.2 billion people without guaranteed access to safe drinking water, 2.2 billion impoverished people living next to contaminated rivers or aquifers. If we are not, if we are to meet this challenge, the first thing to do is to listen to and empower those who suffer the problems and struggle to overcome them, especially young people who are already, in fact, taking the lead in face of climate change, for instance. Those most directly affected by the problems may not be right, perhaps, in everything they say or propose, but they are undoubtedly the ones who know best the problem they suffer from. And on the other hand, it is necessary to empower in an effective way women who carry the burden of care in families and communities, and are the most interested and committed to the effective development of the human right to safe drinking water and sanitation. From this perspective, experiences of reciprocal agreements in the management of river basins, such as one from Bolivia, are very positive, but without forgetting that guaranteeing the sustainability of a river and the human rights of the riparian communities cannot depend on whether or not agreements of this type are made, but rather are obligations of the state that will undoubtedly be better developed if participatory approaches such as those represented by these practices are applied. Empowering people, as I understand in the case of Mali, and the Jail Choupal system, as I understood it, provides an example of community management in rural areas integrated and institutionally recognized by the authorities, developing traditional models that are still in place. I'm grateful.
Pedro, I think we're at the end of our time, but thank you very much for those inspiring words. This has been a great closing for us and a great perspective to have. I'd like to say a huge thank you to you and to Autumn, Caliste, Afu, Puneet, Maria Teresa, for being an excellent panel, very thought-provoking. I'd also like to thank all of those who work behind the scenes to support preparation. Lord, Erica, and Gaia, thank you to you. Sarah, thank you very much for being the driving force behind pulling this together. It's been a very interesting session. I've learned a lot, and I hope our participants have appreciated it. So I'm going to wish you all farewell and hope you enjoy the rest of Stockholm Water Week.